Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a time of unimaginable terror. A period shrouded in fear, superstition, and the grim specter of death. We're traveling to the heart of the Middle Ages, to a Europe gripped by the most devastating pandemic in human history, the Black Death. And you're not just an observer tonight. You're donning the dark robes and the terrifying, beaked mask of a medieval plague doctor. It's a role that promises little glory, plenty of horror, and a very, very high chance of not making it to the sequel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken to the pervasive stench of death. It's not just the smell of decay, but a complex, cloying aroma of sickness, fear, and the desperate, often futile attempts to mask it with smoke and unburnt herbs. You are in a city, perhaps Florence or London, a bustling hub now choked by a silent, invisible enemy. The usual clamor of the marketplace is replaced by a terrifying quiet, punctuated by the rhythmic tolling of church bells, announcing yet another departure. Your small room, usually filled with the mundane tools of a barber surgeon, now seems like a fragile fortress against an unseen siege. You run your hand over the rough wool of your tunic, feeling the familiar weight of your leather satchel, packed with instruments that offer little comfort. The air is cold, despite the looming summer heat, a chill that seeps into your bones. Born of pervasive dread, you are not a highly trained physician by modern standards. In fact, you're likely a second-rate doctor, a barber surgeon, or perhaps even someone recently hired by the city council, desperate for anyone willing to confront the rampant pestilence. True, esteemed doctors have often fled, or are sequestered with the wealthy elite. You are here because there is a dire need, and perhaps because you have nowhere else to go, or a desperate hope for municipal pay. The grim reality hits you with every faint cough echoing from outside, every distant cry of "bring out your dead." This is the Black Death, a plague of bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic forms, sweeping across continents, indiscriminately claiming lives, intellectually, that people are dying. But now, you are about to confront it face to face. In its most gruesome manifestations, a universal historical fact that governs your new terrifying reality is that the Black Death decimated Europe's population, wiping out an estimated 30% to 50% of its inhabitants. This wasn't just a bad flu season, it was an existential threat, changing the course of history, altering social structures, and leaving an indelible mark on the collective psyche. You are a frontline combatant in this unprecedented demographic catastrophe, a silent witness to mass extinction on a scale rarely seen, a peculiar, less commonly known detail you might ponder as you prepare is the legal status of plague doctors. You are often a municipal employee, hired by cities desperate for medical assistance during outbreaks. This means your pay is often better than that of a regular physician. But your duties are far more dangerous and less glamorous. You are essentially a public servant of death, contractually obligated to face the very thing others flee. Your compensation might include free housing or a guaranteed salary, a small comfort in the face of immense personal risk. As you consider your grim task, a fascinating academic debate arises. To what extent did medieval people understand the true nature of contagion? Or were their efforts to combat the plague based primarily on miasma theory and divine punishment? While the concept of miasma bad air dominated medical thought, leading to practices like burning aromatic herbs, there were also practical observations of person-to-person transmission, leading to rudimentary quarantines. Did they intuitively grasp contagion? Or was it a happy accident that some preventative measures worked you? As a practitioner, we'll soon see firsthand the terrifying effectiveness of an unseen enemy. Regardless of the prevailing theories, you done your rough. Dark woolen gown. It's thick, extending to your ankles, meant to provide a physical barrier. You pull up the hood, feeling the scratchy fabric against your neck. Around your neck, you might hang a small bag of potent-smelling herbs, lavender, mint, rosemary, to ward off the bad air or miasma that is believed to carry the disease. It's a small, almost superstitious gesture, but any protection is better than none. You reach for the defining element of your new identity, the beaked mask. It's made of leather, stiff and unyielding, shaped like a bird's beak. You lift it, the dark eye holes staring back at you. Inside the beak, packed tightly, are more aromatic substances, dried flowers, herbs, spices like cloves and cinnamon, even ambergris. The idea is that these strong, pleasant odors will filter the putrid air, protecting you from the miasma as you strap it on. The world outside becomes a muffled echo, viewed through the narrow, glass-covered eye holes. Your breathing is shallow, constrained by the packed herbs. The world smells vaguely of potpourri and a deep, underlying stench of sickness. You pull on thick leather gloves, reaching up to your elbows, and grasp your long wooden stick. This pointing stick is your primary tool for examining patients without direct contact, for moving corpses, and for pushing back overly eager crowds or desperate family members. It's a symbol of your grim profession, a barrier between life and death. You step out of your room, into the quiet, desolate street. The sunlight feels weak, almost sickly. The air is heavy, not just with the stench, but with a palpable sense of fear that hangs in every alleyway, every shuttered window. You hear the distant cries for help, the mournful singing of funerary processions, the occasional frantic shout of someone collapsing. This is your new reality. This is the horrifying life of a medieval plague doctor. And your shift has just begun. Your first steps into the plague-stricken streets are a stark introduction to your new reality. The world, once vibrant, is now subdued. A haunting tableau of suffering and abandonment. The usual sounds of daily life, merchants hawking their wares, children playing, neighbors gossiping, are replaced by a chilling quiet, broken only by the mournful cries of the sick and the constant, rhythmic tolling of church bells marking another death. The air itself feels heavy, a tangible weight of fear and despair. You pass houses with red crosses painted on their doors. Stark warnings of the contagion within. The stench, which was merely an undercurrent in your room, now assaults your senses the sweet, sickening smell of decay, mixed with the acrid scent of burning tar and vinegar. Desperate attempts to purify the bad air. Your beaked mask, packed with its aromatic herbs, does little to fully block out the pervasive odor. It merely adds a layer of sickly sweet potpourri to the putrefaction. You realize, with a chilling certainty, that this mask is less a shield and more a symbol, a terrifying beacon of your grim profession. Your long wooden stick becomes an extension of your arm, a necessary barrier. You use it to tap on doors, to point to victims, to keep desperate family members at a distance. It's a tool of both examination and self-preservation. A stark reminder that physical contact is an invitation to contagion. The fear in people's eyes when they see you're black-robed. Beaked figure is palpable. You are a harbinger of doom, a necessary evil upon entering a home. The scene is almost always the same desperation. Families huddle together, some already showing the telltale signs of the plague. The chills, the fever, the agonizing swollen lymph nodes. You see their pleading eyes, their desperate hope for a cure, a miracle. You know, deep down, that you have none to offer. Only grim observation and a few, often useless, remedies A universal historical fact that becomes agonizingly clear is the helplessness of medieval medicine against the Black Death. Doctors of your era, lacking any understanding of germ theory or antibiotics, were utterly powerless against Yersinia pestis. Their treatments were based on the prevailing humoral theory, believing disease was caused by an imbalance of the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Every cure you attempt is an exercise in futility against a microscopic enemy you cannot comprehend. A less commonly known detail that you might observe in these infected homes is the sheer speed with which the disease could progress. While some suffered for days, others would be struck down and die within hours. Sometimes before the telltale bubo's swollen lymph nodes even fully appeared. You might find families huddled around a seemingly fine relative in the morning, only to return hours later to find them cold and still. A terrifying testament to the plague's relentless efficiency. This rapid progression often led to panic and abandonment as you navigate these scenes of despair. An intriguing academic debate arises: did the presence of plague doctors, despite their lack of effective cures, offer any psychological comfort or social stability to plague-stricken communities? While their medical interventions were largely ineffective, their very presence, as official representatives trying to combat the disease, might have provided a sense of order or hope in the face of chaos. Were they true healers, or merely ritualistic performers, fulfilling a societal need for action? However futile you, walking through these homes, see both the desperate hope in the eyes of the dying and the grim futility of your efforts. Your examination of the sick begins. With your pointing stick, you gently prod and observe. Your primary focus is on the buboes, the swollen, painful lymph nodes that are the hallmark of the bubonic plague. They appear in the groin, armpits, or neck, sometimes growing to the size of an apple or an egg. Black and oozing. The sight is horrifying. The smell of the infected tissue even worse. Piercing through the herbs in your mask, you might cut open these buboes. A painful procedure for the patient, hoping to drain the pus and bad humors. This is often done with a crude knife or a hot iron. The pain is excruciating. The patient screams echoing in the room. But you are taught that this is necessary to release the disease. You apply various concoctions to these open wound salves made of tree sap, flower petals, or even, disturbingly, dried toad or human excrement, believing these substances draw out the poison. The patient writhes, their fevered skin hot beneath your gloved hand as you hold them still. You also look for the blackened extremities, fingers, toes, nose, turning gangrenous. A sign of the septicemic plague, where the infection has spread through the bloodstream. These patients are often beyond help, their bodies already succumbing to the ravages of the disease. You might advise extreme measures like bloodletting, cutting a vein to balance the humors by removing excess blood, a practice that more often weakened the patient further. The hopelessness of it all is crushing. You move from one patient to the next, one house to another, performing the same futile rituals, witnessing the same horrifying progression of symptoms. Your hands, despite the thick gloves, begin to feel the lingering phantom sensations of fevered skin and the stickiness of pus. The scent of sickness clings to your robes, an invisible shroud that even the strongest herbs cannot dispel. You are a doctor in a time when medicine had no answers, only desperate, often horrifying, questions. The stench of decaying flesh and desperate remedies continues to cling to your robes. An ever-present reminder of your grim profession as you move from one plague-ridden household to the next. You carry not just your medical bag, but the heavy weight of an entire city's despair. You realize that your efforts, however futile, are all that stand between the dying and complete abandonment. Your long wooden stick becomes more than just an examination tool. It's a symbol of your unwelcome presence. Families, desperate for aid, might plead with you, offering meager coin or precious trinkets. Others, consumed by terror, might cower, their eyes wide with fear at your bird-like silhouette. You are both a dreaded specter and a last resort, a walking paradox in a city consumed by death. You remember the various, often bizarre, cures you've been taught to administer. One common practice is the application of poultices made from herbs, bread, or even, disturbingly, dried pigeon droppings directly onto the swollen buboes. The belief is that these substances would draw out the poison from the body. You carefully mix the concoctions, feeling the sticky, often foul-smelling, paste against your gloved hands, then apply them to the agonizingly tender swellings. The patient, writhing in fever, might groan or scream, but you continue, driven by the slim hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this time it might work. Another popular, and equally ineffective, remedy is bloodletting. You might nick a vein, or apply leeches to the patient's skin, believing that releasing bad blood would rebalance the humors and expel the disease. You watch as a thin stream of dark blood wells up, staining the linens, and feel the patient's already weakened pulse flutter. It's a barbaric procedure, but it's a standard practice of your time. A desperate attempt to manipulate the invisible forces believed to govern the body. A universal historical fact that becomes starkly evident in your daily rounds is the ubiquity of superstitious remedies and religious explanations for the plague. Lacking scientific understanding, people turned to prayer, penitence, and a vast array of folk cures. You see homes adorned with protective charms, patients clutching crucifixes, and hear desperate prayers to saints. These practices, however unscientific, provided psychological comfort and a sense of agency in the face of an incomprehensible horror. You might even find yourself offering a silent prayer, a desperate plea to a higher power. As you move from one dying patient to the next, a peculiar, less commonly known detail you might encounter is the widespread use of smelling balls or pomanders. These small, ornate containers, often filled with strong-smelling aromatic substances like ambergris, civet, or dried herbs, were carried by wealthier individuals, including doctors like yourself. To ward off miasma, you might notice them clutched in the hands of the dying, or hanging from the belts of those brave or foolish enough to be out on the streets. It's a small, personal attempt to create a bubble of clean air in a world suffused with putrefaction. A desperate, fragrant defense against the invisible killer as you apply these dubious treatments. An intriguing academic debate arises: did the psychological impact of a plague doctor's presence, even with their ineffective remedies, sometimes offer more benefit than the actual cures, while their medical interventions were useless? The act of a professional tending to the sick, offering a semblance of hope or action, might have provided comfort to the terrified. Was it the treatment, or the perception of being treated? That offered a momentary flicker of relief. You looking into the desperate eyes of the sick. Sometimes wonder if your presence is a comfort or merely a grim confirmation of their impending doom. The variety of concoctions you carry is astonishing, a testament to the wild speculation that passed for medical knowledge. You have vials of theriac, a complex, ancient panacea made from dozens of ingredients, including opium, viper's flesh, and honey, believed to be an antidote to all poisons. You might have various herbal infusions, prepared from mandrake, hemlock, or valerian, intended to induce sleep or dull pain. The bitter taste, the strange texture of these remedies, becomes intimately familiar. You also carry a range of smaller instruments: crude scalpels for lancing buboes, tongs for gripping hot irons, and perhaps a small set of cupping glasses. Your education, though limited by modern standards, has given you enough practical skill to perform these basic surgical procedures, however painful and ineffective they may be. You learn to work quickly, to minimize the patient's suffering, to maintain a professional detachment in the face of overwhelming agony. The air inside the plague-stricken homes is stagnant, heavy with the breath of the sick and the stench of their fevered bodies. The sounds are hushed, broken only by the occasional cough, the rattling breath of the dying, or the quiet sobs of family members. You move through these intimate scenes of suffering. A silent, dark-robed figure, a grim reaper with a bag of useless tricks. Despite the horror, you learn to observe. You notice patterns in the disease, how quickly it strikes, how it affects different people. You see the various stages of the buboes, from small, tender swellings to large, bursting abscesses. You witness the horrifying progression from fever to delirium. To the dark spots on the skin, the gods' tokens or roses of death that signal the final. Septicemic stage. Your mind, though limited by the knowledge of your era, acts as a crude recorder, documenting the terrible efficiency of the plague. The sun begins to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the deserted streets. Your shift is far from over. More church bells toll, each chime a hammer blow to your increasingly heavy heart. You wipe the sweat from beneath your mask, feeling the herbs press against your nose. The smell of death has now permeated your very being, a constant, chilling companion. The relentless cycle of visiting the sick, applying the same futile remedies, and witnessing the swift, horrifying descent into death continues. As days bleed into weeks, your understanding of the plague's terrifying efficiency grows, even if your ability to combat it remains tragically limited. You become intimately familiar with the symptoms: the agonizing headache, the sudden chills and fever, the vomiting of bile, and, of course, the ever-present, putrid smell of the buboes, the swollen, blackened lymph nodes that are the plague's signature. Your daily routine often involves a grim ritual, lancing the buboes. You approach the patient, their fevered body writhing, their skin slick with sweat, with a crude, unsterilized knife, or sometimes a heated iron. You make an incision into the painfully distended bubo. A gush of dark, foul-smelling pus and blood erupts, staining the linens and filling the air with a stench that even your herb-packed mask struggles to filter. The patient screams, a raw, primal sound of agony. But you are taught that this drainage is necessary to expel the poison from the body. You then apply the various poultices, perhaps a mixture of tree sap, clay, or even in more desperate measures, dried human or animal excrement, believing these would draw out the remaining infection. You witness firsthand the rapid progression of the disease. A patient might present with a fever in the morning, the buboes barely visible, and by nightfall, their skin is covered in dark blotches, their breathing shallow and ragged, their extremities turning black. These are the gods' tokens, or roses of death. Small, black necrotic lesions on the skin, a terrifying sign that the septicemic form of the plague has taken hold, meaning death is inevitable and often swift. You learn to recognize these signs with grim certainty, knowing when your presence is merely a formality, a final futile gesture. A universal historical fact that becomes terrifyingly clear is the overwhelming mortality rate of the Black Death for those who contracted the bubonic form. Survival rates were incredibly low, often less than 20–30%, and for the pneumonic and septicemic forms, it was virtually 100% fatal. You are a doctor in an era where most of your patients will die. Regardless of your intervention, this constant exposure to death, this relentless parade of the dying, takes a heavy psychological toll, even for someone as hardened as you become. A peculiar, less commonly known detail you might be aware of, especially in larger cities, is the practice of inspecting the dead for signs of plague before burial. This wasn't just to confirm death, but to identify the specific cause for public health records, however rudimentary they might be. You might be called upon to examine bodies, looking for the telltale buboes or black spots. Confirming that the deceased succumbed to the plague, this grim task further desensitizes you to the raw reality of death, transforming bodies into mere statistical entries in the city's overflowing ledgers of the dead as you perform these gruesome duties. An intriguing academic debate arises: did the actual cutting and lancing of buboes, however unsterile, sometimes inadvertently provide a minimal benefit by releasing pressure and localizing infection? Despite the overwhelming lack of understanding of microbiology, while certainly not a cure, and often causing secondary infections, some modern medical historians ponder if, in rare instances, this crude drainage might have offered a slight, temporary relief, or even, by sheer chance, aided in the body's attempt to wall off the infection. You observing the temporary relief on a patient's face after a particularly painful lancing can only hope that your efforts, however crude, are making some infinitesimal difference. The sheer volume of calls forces you into a relentless rhythm. You move from one shuttered home to another, the chilling calls of "bring out your dead" echoing in the narrow streets. You learn to navigate the abandoned alleys, stepping over discarded belongings, and, occasionally, the unburied dead. The city, once vibrant and bustling, is now a silent, open tomb. The only constant is the relentless tolling of the church bells. A grim soundtrack to the unfolding tragedy. Your gloves, once somewhat pristine, are now stained and stiff with bodily fluids. The herbs in your mask are losing their potency, and the smell of sickness and decay seeps deeper into your clothing. Your skin, your very being. You become accustomed to the desperate pleas, the frantic prayers, the vacant stares of those succumbing to delirium. Your senses are overwhelmed, yet paradoxically dulled by the constant exposure to horror. The emotional toll is immense. You see mothers weeping over their children, husbands cradling their dying wives, entire families succumbing one by one. You offer what little comfort you can, a mumbled prayer, a gentle touch with your stick, but you know it is never enough. The helplessness is a heavy cloak you wear alongside your dark robes. Occasionally, you encounter people attempting their own, even more desperate, remedies. Some might be flagellants, whipping themselves in the streets, believing divine punishment is the cause and self-mortification the cure. Others might be trying strange rituals, burning elaborate incenses, or even engaging in frantic revelry, believing that living life to the fullest is the only answer before death claims them. You observe these desperate acts with a grim understanding. They too are grappling with an incomprehensible horror. Just as you are, the sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop to a scene of unrelenting despair. You are weary, your muscles ache, and your mind is a swirling vortex of images: swollen buboes, blackened limbs, desperate faces. But the calls for help continue, Antoine. The church bells keep tolling. And you, the medieval plague doctor, continue your grim, futile rounds, a solitary figure against the tide of death. The city, once a vibrant tapestry of life, has become a ghost town, punctuated by the chilling sounds of suffering and the desperate, often futile, actions of its inhabitants. As a medieval plague doctor, you are now intimately familiar with the concept of quarantine, a desperate measure adopted by authorities to try and contain the relentless spread of the Black Death. You see it everywhere: houses with their doors boarded shut, red crosses starkly painted as grim warnings, signifying that those within are infected or have been exposed and are condemned to isolation. Sometimes, a guard might be posted outside, ensuring no one leaves and no one enters. You, however, are one of the few exceptions. Granted grim passage to enter these houses of despair, the air around these quarantined homes feels even heavier, thick with unspoken terror and the muffled cries from within. You recall the desperate pleas of families as they are sealed within their homes, separated from healthy relatives, left to face the plague alone. You also witness the agonizing choice faced by many abandon their sick loved ones to save themselves, or stay and risk inevitable infection. The sight of empty streets, once teeming with life, now reinforces the grim effectiveness of quarantine by not in curing the sick, but in stopping the disease's march, at least theoretically. A universal historical fact that this pervasive isolation underscores is the development of early public health measures in response to the plague. While rudimentary and often brutal, cities across Europe implemented quarantines, restricted travel, and even created special lazarettos or plague hospitals. These measures, born of desperation, were the beginnings of organized public health efforts, a grim testament to humanity's fight against an invisible enemy. You are an essential, albeit terrifying, part of this early system. A peculiar, less commonly known detail you might stumble upon is the use of plague stones or sanitary posts on the outskirts of cities. These large stones, often with hollows carved into them, were filled with vinegar or water. Where money could be disinfected before being brought into the city, people could exchange goods at a distance, placing their payment in the disinfected hollow. You might pass one on your way in or out of the city gates. A silent, humble monument to the desperate attempts at containing the unseen killer. It's a quaint, yet grim, symbol of their fear of transmission through everyday objects. As you navigate these scenes of enforced isolation and despair, an intriguing academic debate arises. Did early quarantine measures genuinely reduce the spread of the plague? Or were their benefits largely negligible compared to the natural course of the epidemic and the widespread lack of adherence? While some historical accounts suggest localized success, critics argue that the methods were too crude, enforcement too inconsistent, and the understanding of the disease too limited for quarantines to be truly effective on a large scale. You, observing families being locked in, only to succumb within days, can only wonder if these drastic measures were truly making a difference, or simply delaying the inevitable for a few. The desperation within these quarantined homes is palpable. Families, knowing their fate, often turn to frantic prayer, or to the last rites of a priest. If one is brave enough to enter, others descend into delirium, their fevered minds creating terrifying hallucinations. You step through these thresholds, a silent, robed figure, armed with a stick and remedies you know are largely useless. You might be called upon to record wills, to witness final confessions, or to simply offer a momentary, terrifying presence before the end. The emotional toll is immense. You hear the last rattling breaths, the final whimpers of children, the quiet despair of adults. The air, even through your mask, is thick with the scent of sickness, but now also with the heavy perfume of fear, loneliness, and the bitter taste of impending death. The boundaries between the living and the dead blur. You walk among both, a ghost in a ghost town. The absence of normal life is suffocating. No laughter, no street vendors, no church services, save for the grim daily tolling. You hear stories of people abandoning their families, fleeing the cities, leaving their sick to die alone. You also hear tales of incredible bravery and self-sacrifice, of neighbors tending to neighbors until they too succumb. Humanity, in its darkest hour, reveals both its worst and its most noble facets. The sense of being utterly overwhelmed is constant. The sheer number of sick, the endless calls for your presence, the rapid succession of deaths. It's a relentless onslaught that wears down even the most hardened individual. Your uniform, once a symbol of authority, now feels like a heavy shroud, constantly reminding you of the contagion that permeates every aspect of your life. As evening falls, the already muted light of the quarantined streets becomes even more somber. The cries of the sick become more plaintive, echoing in the deepening shadows. You pause, leaning on your stick, and look at the red crosses on the doors, knowing that behind each one lies a story of agony, isolation, and often a swift, brutal end. Your duty, however hopeless, binds you to this horrifying reality, a solitary sentinel in a world defined by the terrifying silence of quarantine. The living, those who still cling to the frail threads of existence in this plague-ridden city, eventually yield to the dead. Your role as a medieval plague doctor extends far beyond crude medical interventions. You are also a grim statistician, a reluctant undertaker, and a silent witness to the chilling, overwhelming toll of the dead. Every day, the piles of bodies grow. You see them in the streets, sometimes covered hastily with a sheet, sometimes left entirely exposed. The once sacred act of individual burial gives way to mass graves, hurriedly dug pits outside the city walls, or even within churchyards that quickly become overflowing. The smell of decay, once subtle, is now a pervasive, nauseating cloud that hangs over everything, seeping into your very bones. Even your herb-filled mask struggles against this constant assault on your senses. You become accustomed to the sight of the death carts, drawn by tired horses or desperate men, rumbling through the streets. Collecting the latest victims, the cries of "Bring out your dead" become a chillingly familiar refrain, a macabre soundtrack to your daily rounds. You often accompany these carts, identifying bodies, sometimes even helping to load them, your long stick useful for keeping a distance while still performing your duties. A universal historical fact that you are now living through is the complete breakdown of traditional burial practices during the Black Death. The sheer volume of deaths overwhelmed the capacity of churches and grave diggers. Individual coffins became a luxury, replaced by shrouds and mass graves. The emphasis shifted from dignified burial to simply disposing of the bodies as quickly as possible to prevent further spread of disease. A stark and horrifying testament to the plague's relentless efficiency. A peculiar, less commonly known detail you might observe is the practice of resurrection men or body snatchers, though perhaps not for scientific study as in later centuries, but simply to strip bodies of any remaining valuables before their unceremonious burial. You might catch glimpses of shadowy figures in the twilight, their movements furtive, their intentions clear. It's a grim reminder that even in death, the very poor might not find peace, and even the dying plague-stricken might be subject to final indignities. It adds another layer of horror to an already unbearable reality, as you bear witness to this overwhelming death. An intriguing academic debate arises. How did the scale of death during the Black Death impact the religious beliefs and spiritual practices of the survivors, while some turned to fervent prayer and penitence? Others questioned the justice of God, leading to a rise in skepticism or new, often radical, religious movements. Did this mass mortality strengthen faith, or fundamentally challenge it? You, witnessing both the desperate prayers of the dying and the quiet, almost defiant, despair of the survivors. See how the plague forces a profound reckoning with the divine. The faces of the dead blur into a horrifying collage in your mind. Young and old, rich and poor, all indiscriminately claimed by the invisible killer. You perform rudimentary inspections, confirming death, sometimes still searching for the telltale buboes. Even though the cause is abundantly clear, your gloved hands, once focused on lancing boils, now move with practiced solemnity over stiffening limbs, preparing them for the crude shroud. The air around the mass graves is thick with the scent of lime, thrown over the bodies in an attempt to combat the smell and, perhaps, the spread of the disease. The ground itself feels saturated with death, soft beneath your feet from the newly disturbed earth. The sheer scale of the burials is overwhelming, a physical manifestation of the pandemic's relentless grip. Your own humanity begins to fray under the constant assault of death. The initial shock gives way to a grim resignation, then to a detached efficiency. You learn to compartmentalize, to block out the grief, the fear, the horror. Otherwise, you would surely break. You become a conduit for death, a silent, dark-robed figure moving through the valley of shadows. The sounds of the city are now dominated by the creak of the death carts, the occasional sob, and the incessant tolling of the bells. The vibrant life you once knew has been extinguished. leaving behind only the hushed movements of the terrified few and the ubiquitous presence of the dead. You are a sentinel in this landscape of desolation, your presence a grim necessity until the plague finally, mercifully, loosens its grip. The days stretch into an endless, horrifying continuum. You are perpetually tired, your body aching, your mind numb. But the dead demand attention, the city needs records, and your duty, however gruesome, calls. You continue your rounds, a solitary figure against the backdrop of Europe's greatest catastrophe, meticulously counting the cost of an invisible war. As the plague rages, stripping away lives and social order, you, the medieval plague doctor, find yourself caught in a brutal tug-of-war between the pervasive grip of superstition and the nascent, often futile, efforts of rudimentary science. The air around you is thick not just with disease, but with fear, prayer, and desperate, unproven theories. You witness firsthand the widespread reliance on religious explanations for the plague. Processions of flagellants, whipping themselves in the streets, believing that self-mortification will appease a wrathful God, are a common sight. People clutch religious relics, pray fervently to saints, and engage in elaborate rituals of penitence, all desperate attempts to understand and control an incomprehensible horror. You see the fear in their eyes, a raw, primal terror that often overshadows any rational thought. Contrastingly, you also apply the limited scientific understanding of your time. You recall the teachings of the humoral theory, which posits that disease is caused by an imbalance of the four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your treatments, such as bloodletting, cupping, or administering purgatives and emetics, are all aimed at restoring this perceived balance. You might even advise patients to eat certain foods or avoid others, based on their supposed humoral properties. These are not random acts, they are rooted in the established medical doctrine of your era. However flawed it may be, a universal historical fact that this constant struggle highlights is the profound tension between faith and reason in the medieval world. Especially during a crisis like the Black Death, while the Church provided solace and explanation, the inadequacy of both religious and medical interventions forced people to confront the limits of their understanding. This period saw both a surge in religious fervor and, for some, a questioning of divine providence, leading to a complex societal response. You, as a practitioner, are navigating this very fault line, trying to offer both physical and spiritual guidance. A peculiar, less commonly known detail you might encounter in your daily rounds is the use of specific, often outlandish, amulets and talismans worn by both the sick and the healthy, beyond simple religious symbols. People would wear items like dried toads, arsenic embedded in rings, or even bags of ground unicorn horn, which was likely narwhal tusk, believing these possessed magical protective qualities against the plague. You might see a patient clutching a bag of these strange items, their belief in their power perhaps offering more psychological comfort than any of your actual remedies. It's a reminder of the desperate lengths people would go to in order to feel a semblance of control as you administer your bloodlettings and apply your poultices. An intriguing academic debate arises: did the prevailing miasma theory, despite being incorrect, inadvertently lead to any beneficial public health practices during the plague? While the idea of bad air was scientifically wrong, it encouraged practices like burning aromatic substances, cleaning streets to remove sources of bad smells, and even avoiding crowded, poorly ventilated areas. These actions, though based on a faulty premise, might have had a marginal, if unintended, positive impact on reducing transmission. You, constantly concerned with cleansing the air around you, can attest to the pervasive belief in miasma's power. You might advise patients to avoid certain foods, to keep warm or cool depending on their perceived humoral imbalance, or to simply rest. You might also prescribe specific prayers or recommend confessing sins, acknowledging the spiritual dimension of the illness. Your role extends beyond just the physical body. You are also a spiritual counselor, offering what comfort and guidance you can in the face of overwhelming despair. The scientific tools at your disposal are laughably primitive: a few scalpels, a hot iron, bandages, and your own limited knowledge of anatomy gleaned from rudimentary dissections, often of animals. As human dissection was rare and controversial, you rely heavily on observation: the color of the patient's urine, the texture of their skin, the progression of the buboes. Your diagnostic process is based on what you can see, hear, and smell, interpreted through the lens of ancient medical texts. The lack of effective treatments and the sheer scale of death sometimes lead to extreme, desperate measures. You might hear whispers of people trying to flee the city, despite official bans, or of desperate families abandoning their sick to try and save themselves. You also witness acts of immense self-sacrifice, of individuals tending to their loved ones until their own inevitable demise. The plague strips away societal norms, revealing the raw essence of human nature. As night falls, bringing with it the chilling sounds of despair, you sit in your humble quarters, cleaning your instruments, the pervasive scent of your herbal mask still clinging to your face. You contemplate the day's grim harvest. Despite your efforts, despite the prayers, the sickness continues its relentless march. The battle between superstition and rudimentary science plays out in every home you visit, in every life you witness extinguished, and you, the plague doctor, are at its very heart. A solitary figure desperately trying to hold back the tide of death with little more than faith and flawed knowledge. Your life as a medieval plague doctor is not just about tending to the sick and witnessing death in a city ravaged by pestilence, where traditional governance crumbles under the weight of mass mortality. Your role expands far beyond the purely medical. You become a crucial, albeit grim, public servant, an indispensable cog in the desperate machinery of urban survival. You find yourself undertaking duties that, in normal times, would fall to a city clerk, a notary, or even a local magistrate, with so many officials dead or having fled. Your presence as a recognized and often paid municipal employee makes you a rare, stable point of contact for the terrified populace. You might be called upon to record deaths, not just for account, but for legal purposes, noting who has died, what property they leave behind, and who their heirs might be. You carry a ledger, its pages filling rapidly with grim entries, each name a life extinguished. You are often tasked with witnessing wills. In a time when death is omnipresent and swift, people are desperate to put their affairs in order. You sit by flickering candlelight, listening to the hurried, often gasping, final wishes of the dying, scribbling down their bequests, and perhaps affixing your crude seal as a testament to its authenticity. It's a chilling responsibility, becoming the last link in the legal chain for those about to enter eternity. A universal historical fact that this expanded role illustrates is the devastating impact of the Black Death on social and administrative structures. Cities often lost their entire councils, legal professionals, and clergy. The surviving few, like you, were forced to assume new, often overwhelming, responsibilities to maintain a semblance of order. You are a testament to the resilience and adaptability of society, even in the face of unprecedented catastrophe, though it comes at immense personal cost. A peculiar, less commonly known detail you might observe is the practice of property confiscation for public use, with so many dying and no surviving heirs, or with families simply abandoning their homes. Cities might seize houses and their contents. You might be involved in documenting these empty properties, which are then cleaned or at least aired out and repurposed. Sometimes, the city might use the proceeds from selling these abandoned goods to fund your own salary or other public health measures. It's a grim form of resource management born of absolute necessity, as you navigate these non-medical yet vital duties. An intriguing academic debate arises: did the Black Death, by collapsing existing social hierarchies and administrative systems, inadvertently paved the way for long-term social and economic changes in Europe. Some historians argue that the massive population reduction led to labor shortages, empowering peasants and creating more social mobility. Others focus on the increased power of centralized authorities as they consolidated control during the crisis. You witnessing the immediate chaos and the desperate attempts to reestablish order are a silent witness to the seeds of future societal transformation. You also become a de facto enforcer of quarantine rules. You report those who try to break isolation, or those who hide the sick. While you might feel a pang of sympathy for their desperation, your duty to the city, to the larger good, compels you to uphold these harsh regulations. You're also involved in the grim task of identifying public spaces for mass graves, or advising on areas that need to be cleansed with fire and smoke. Your presence, despite the fear it inspires, also serves as a strange symbol of authority and a connection to the outside world for those confined by illness. People might ask you for news from other parts of the city, for updates on the plague's ebb or flow, or for reassurance that someone, however grim, is still watching over them. You become a carrier of information, a thread connecting isolated households to the wider, shattered community. The sheer exhaustion from these myriad duties is immense. You are constantly on the move, your senses assaulted by the sights, sounds, and smells of death and despair. Sleep is fleeting, disturbed by nightmares of bubbling sores and final gasps. But the city needs you. The dead need to be counted. The living need their affairs put in order. And some semblance of civic function must be maintained. You clean your mask and gloves meticulously each night. A small ritual of self-preservation. A desperate attempt to wash away the day's horrors. The herbs in your beak, once a fragrant shield, now seem barely able to mask the stench that has permeated your very being. Yet, you continue, for the municipal pay, for the faint hope of making a difference, or simply because there is no one else. You are the medieval plague doctor, and your harrowing public duty is far from over, as the plague's terrifying grip slowly loosens, leaving behind a scarred and depleted landscape. You, the medieval plague doctor, begin to witness the first, tentative steps towards recovery, but the horrors you've endured, the relentless confrontation with death, leave an indelible mark, a shadow that will forever linger over your life. The calls for your services become less frantic, less frequent. The rhythmic tolling of the church bells, once an incessant dirge, now punctuates the silence with longer, mournful pauses. The stench of decay begins to recede, replaced by the faint, fresh scent of newly turned earth in the burgeoning mass graves. The city, though still bearing the scars of its ordeal, slowly begins to breathe again. You walk through streets that are no longer deserted, but populated by a fraction of their former inhabitants. Those who survived emerge, often gaunt and haunted, but alive. You see the tentative reopening of shops, the hesitant return of merchants. The communal grief is palpable, a heavy cloak worn by every survivor, but beneath it, a fragile spark of hope begins to flicker. A universal historical fact that you are now experiencing is the profound societal and economic restructuring that followed the Black Death. The massive population reduction led to labor shortages, which, paradoxically, often empowered the surviving peasantry and urban workers. Land became more abundant, wages sometimes rose, and the rigid feudal system began to show cracks. You might observe fields lying fallow or hear whispers of demands for better pay, signs of a world irrevocably altered. A peculiar, less commonly known detail you might notice in the aftermath is the proliferation of new, often macabre, art and literature. The trauma of the plague expressed itself in cultural forms. Dances of death. Dance macabre became popular motifs in art, depicting skeletons leading people from all walks of life to their graves. You might see new frescoes in churches, or hear new songs. all reflecting the omnipresence of death and the fragility of life. It's a collective grieving process, a way for society to process the incomprehensible as you witness this slow, painful rebirth. An intriguing academic debate arises. Did the Black Death ultimately lead to a more resilient or a more pessimistic European society? While the immediate aftermath was undoubtedly filled with despair and loss, some historians argue that the plague forced innovations in technology, medicine, and social organization, leading to a stronger, more adaptable continent in the long run. Others focus on the long-term psychological scarring and the deepening of fatalistic worldviews. You, having walked through the valley of death, know that resilience comes at an unspeakable cost. Your own physical exhaustion begins to lessen, but the mental and emotional toll remains heavy. The images of suffering, the pleas of the dying, the ubiquitous presence of death, these are etched into your memory, a permanent part of your being. You find it difficult to sleep, haunted by nightmares of swollen buboes and the screams of the afflicted. The mask, once a symbol of protection, now feels like a burden. It sent a constant reminder of the horrors it witnessed. You clean your long robes and tools with painstaking care, but you know the invisible contamination, both physical and psychological, will never truly be removed. The once clear lines between life and death have blurred irrevocably in your mind. You are forever changed by your time as a plague doctor. You might find yourself ostracized by some, feared by others, even by those you tried to save. Your dark attire and beaked mask became synonymous with death, a grim association that is hard to shake. You are a survivor. Yes, but also a walking testament to a period of unimaginable horror. Yet, a grim satisfaction might settle over you. You faced the invisible enemy. You did not flee. You carried out your duty, however futile the remedies, however overwhelming the death. You bore witness, and in a strange way, you helped your city, your community, to survive, to count its dead, to process its grief, and to begin the long, slow process of healing. Your purpose was grim, but it was a purpose nonetheless. The last of the summer heat gives way to the cooler air of autumn. The scent of decaying bodies lessens, replaced by the crisp smell of leaves and wood smoke. You stand on the edge of the city, looking out at the mass graves, now covered with earth, soon to be forgotten by future generations. But you will never forget. The horrifying life of a medieval plague doctor has ended, but its chilling lessons will haunt your days, a constant echo of humanity's brush with oblivion, as the grim echoes of the plague-ridden streets begin to fade, and the chilling silence of medieval Europe settles once more. You can feel the heavy cloak of history gently lifting, the beaked mask, the darkened robes, the scent of fear and desperate remedies, all dissolve into the quiet hum of your own present moment. Let the weight of those horrifying truths, the bravery and the futility, drift away like wisps of smoke in the cool night air. The stories of those who walked through the darkest of times remind us of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Even when facing the incomprehensible, now, rest deeply, knowing that some shadows of history, though chilling, are best left to the quiet of the past